Hello guys, welcome to my very belated Christmas New Year special. Usually, I try to do one Christmas and one New Year special with a dinosaur and a dragon. This year, the one perfect dragon that should have ushered in the new year didn't arrive on time, so we'll look at something that's so big I feel it will serve for both this year. To cap off the year of the sauropod and to welcome what I feel will be another great year for the group, here's the Sideshow Apatosaurus. I'm a big fan of the Sideshow Dinosauria line. I've not just reviewed, but revisited the Sideshow dinosaurs I have. But this is one I never did, because I had a lot going on in my life and I couldn't bring my head around doing what promises to be a really tricky review. Mainly because of the sheer size and length. The box alone here is 121 centimeters or 47.6 inches, and the height is 37 centimeters or 14.6 inches. I have no idea how I'm going to do this really. I'll probably end up with a lot of cuts. Apatosaurus needs no introduction. The name means deceptive reptile, and it comes from abatelos, meaning deceptive, and sauros, meaning lizard, because Marsh thought that its chevron bones were more similar to those of mosasaurs rather than other dinosaurs. Taking just a pure horizontal length for an idea of the space that this will occupy, this sideshow measures 95 centimeters or 37.4 inches. The height is 30.5 centimeters or 12.1 inches at the highest point of the tail. Factoring in the curves, I get 105 centimeters. That's a whopping 41.4 inches from end to end. And I want to break it down for you. The neck portion is about 25 centimeters or 9.8 inches. The body is 20 centimeters or 7.9 inches, and the tail is 60 centimeters or 23.6 inches, which makes up almost 60% of the whole model. With the estimate of a typical Apatosaurus at 21 meters, that makes the scale roughly 1 to 20. And here's my Wonder Artistic Models humanoid to illustrate this. Now, as to the weight, it's a hefty 7.1 kilograms or 15.7 pounds. Now, this isn't something you put on just any shelf. So, my overall impression of first the color. In 2015, Sideshow re-released some of their Dinosauria models with new colors. Now, some I didn't like the Carnotaurus, and I'm glad I acquired the original. For the Apatosaurus, however, it's a different story. The original 2011 had a darker olive green and a yellowish flax color. I really loved the dappling effect on the dorsal aspect of the animal. Just something really gentle and peaceful about it, echoing perhaps the nature of the animal. However, when I saw the new release, I liked the overall scheme much better. I missed the dappling and the subtle banding about the original, but long-time viewers know I love the banded looks on tails and necks. And the sharp contrasting colours and a striking pattern just makes this a real eye-catcher. As a consolation, I've been told that the actual in-hand model of the original lost many of those subtle details shown in the Paintmaster. Before I begin, I should point out that these are my own feelings and reactions. However, I also wanted to share with you how a real paleontologist would assess the model. So I'll also link to SVPOW's 7-part review of this very same statue. Indeed, reading that over 10 years ago and seeing how many points I missed was, I think, what really inspired me to learn about the anatomy behind the models I have. Now, the head. Immediately, I get a sense of something really peaceful and gentle about the animal, which is how I've always thought of these magnificent beasts. I really liked the detail when this came out, and I still really like it. You can see the small raised scales around the eye, and down the facial area, a kind of fineness that goes well with this small area. The snout is broad, which suggests a grazing lifestyle for Apatosaurus, and indeed most modern reconstructions depict a pretty horizontal attitude for the neck. The ridiculous relative size of the head is seen very clearly here, especially when contrasting with the appropriately thick, muscular neck. Now, Sideshow decided to go with lips. Now, when this first came out, I wasn't sure how to feel about it. Since then, we've moved on quite a bit, so the concept of lips is no longer as alien as it once was. Now, thankfully, there's no shrink wrapping of the skull. Nowadays, that's normal, but way back in the early 2000s, there was still quite a bit of that going on. Indeed, one thing you'll appreciate from this maquette is how filled out it is with the real bulk you'd expect of a healthy mega animal. And speaking of welcome bulk, we come to the neck. And the one thing I was immediately happy about is the thickness of that neck. Apatosaurus neck bones were robust, very robust, and if you add the overlying musculature and other soft tissues, you'll see they couldn't realistically be reproduced otherwise. And it's not just the thickness per se, but rather the shape of it. Now, one thing that sauropods have are cervical ribs, which stick out sideways from the bones, so that in cross-section, the neck would actually appear to be quite wide, almost triangular in fact. Now, just pick a random sauropod model you have at home, especially one that's more vintage, and chances are the neck will be pretty round. But that's not really the case. And also, because of the bifurcation in the neural spines, you can expect the dorsal to be rather flat. And in this model, we see all this. The more triangular or maybe trapezoidal cross-section, the flat dorsal and ventral, and just the overall shape and volume. Another touch are these indentations here, suggesting the underlying cervical ribs. In my Haolongku Apatosaurus review, I noted that Apatosaurus may have engaged in necking combat, and wondered if these were intended to be osteodermal extensions from the underlying cervical ribs. But way back a decade or so, Sideshow also had these. SVPOW suggests that it just might be possible for the ventrolateral part of the ribs to create these bulges. As for the detail, again, it may be visibly less refined than the models of today. Even then, you can see that the details are there. They're rather understated, and given the very large scale and the perhaps more elephantine interpretation of yesteryear, understandable. The bands, of course, is a favorite theme of mine, especially in tails and long necks. And here, you see how very nice that color mix is. And following the stage set by the neck, you'll see a body that's appropriate and realistically thick and deep. It has a huge gut, appropriate for the monstrous fermentation chambers it housed. Now, don't get me wrong, I like a slim waist as much as the next person, but on a sauropod dinosaur, no. Now here you can see some of that color application, and I just love the very subdued appearance in this transition area. If anything, this area looks to be even nicer than the more showy bands on the neck. You'll see hints of osteoderms in these scutes, and it's nice they've chosen not to overemphasize them, so they look like natural parts of the animal. However, there are a couple of faults, one subtle, the other more glaring. Now first, the skeleton of apatosaurines are very well known, and we know they had 10 dorsal vertebrae. However, here I count only 8. So the torso is perhaps a little short. The other more glaring one is right here, and maybe you can tell intuitively that something isn't quite right here. Now you see the front of the ilium here. The ilium serves as a generous blade for a lot of hip and thigh muscle, so there should be no gap. It looks like some congenital defect or a wasting disease. We should see a bulging with the iliotibial muscles. And the animal will have difficulty walking, particularly during the swing phase of the gait cycle. In fact, come to think of it, this area here looks like it could use a bit of bulking up as well. Moving down, you see in the limbs the kind of thickness required to support such a massive animal. Now, even though we may have seen more detail in some of the most current models, I think you can see that even today, some of this detail really is still very nice. Now look at some of these textures, still very pleasing even by today's standards. Down here we see the 3 claws, and again, even by today's standards, I think you can see how nicely Sideshow paints these keratinous features, and they still look pretty good. You can just really see very nice detail here. Down the arms now, and you can see that once again, they're strong, thick, and very, very robust. The sauropod hand is always important to a sauropod lover, and here you can see that single claw and that crescent of the metacarpals. I find many models tend to have random bulges that don't make sense anatomically, but by and large, I can understand each one on this statue. I really like the tendon insertion into the forearm here, for instance. I dare say that these other toes are more demarcated than you'd see reconstructed today, and this claw is also really long. And overall, this is a really big model, so the form of the limbs exhibit a convincing robustness to really sell their supportive capabilities. They're strong and muscly, and the feet look like they actually bear weight. Something that Sideshow captured really well at a time when this type of realism was sometimes overlooked. Man, this is heavy. Really cumbersome and unwieldy. I hope I don't drop it in front of you guys. Now overall, the tail is long, and it's not a surprise given that there are at least 82 caudal vertebrae. Another thing I really liked about this statue was this upward kink here where the tail starts. Nowadays, it's almost de rigueur, but back then it was still pretty unusual. This, of course, is consistent with how the sacrum is oriented and how the first caudal then articulates with it. The tail is pleasingly thick and massive at the base. Now, one thing I always look at is how filled out the caudofemoralis muscle is. We've often talked about how this bulk is often missing or lacking. Now, this muscle, of course, laterally flexes the tail, but also acts in reverse insertion origin to retract the femur. So it's a very important muscle, and here nicely filled out. Now here you see some of the dermal spines so common in sauropod reconstructions, but only at this end, which actually is consistent with where they were actually found. Now, nowadays, of course, you'll see them running up the entire spine of the animal. As for the tail end, you'll see it ends in that whiplash that characterizes the diplodocids. Now, whether for signaling or for lashing out, there's adequate length for it. Now, that said, Sideshow didn't choose to highlight this function, instead going with a more subtle and shallow undulation. Incidentally, this is the part that gives you the greatest fear when you first unbox it, because it's obviously very fragile. But thankfully, mine is intact, with the result you see here. Finally, let's talk about the base. As with other sideshows, there's a hole to fit the peg on the dinosaur's foot, and again, as I've remarked before, I wish that the peg had been on the base and the hole on the dinosaur foot. As it is, you are constrained to fitting it to the base. You can't display it without, unless you cut it off. The base is really quite plain. There are some other tracks, possibly of a theropod dinosaur, and the Apatosaurus' own fresh footprints. Now what's really annoying is this extra black part they've added to, I believe, all the re-releases. Not only does it add 2 cm or 0.8 inches of height clearance you'll need, it also adds unnecessarily to the weight. So that's it really. Just on size, this is an awesome model. With up-to-date anatomy of its time, this was one of my holy grails. Incidentally, if you like massive dinosaur models, check out Titans of the Earth's YouTube channel, where he showcases mainly big statues. I won't tell you how long I worked to afford this, but the good thing is that Sideshow used to give you months and months notice so you could just place a deposit and slave for the rest. I remember her new Sideshow release was always met with excitement. At least now, PNSO and Haolonggu fill the anticipation gap very nicely, and at a much more affordable price. That said, these were not expensive in their time. This was, I think, US $370 when released in 2014. And in today's dollars, it would be about $480. Still much cheaper than an equivalent model today. I believe that the Sideshow Carnotaurus, for example, was only about US $200. You just see what little $200 can buy you nowadays. Anyway, I'm eager to hear your comments. Let me now wish you a very happy new year 2024, and I'll see you in the next video.